Hello, today we're talking with Shreya Singh, who is living in Chennai, India. She's an arts manager. From 2017, she's running her own company and she's helping artists and organizations reach wider audiences and manage their companies better. Shreya, if you would like to say a couple of words about yourself and your work.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Milena, for having me and for just thinking of this very interesting initiative to listen to all of these different arts professionals from across the spectrum. Like Milena mentioned, my name is Shreya, and I am based out of South India, and I have clients not only in India but abroad as well. What we really do is work at the business end of the arts, and that is anything from strategic planning, revenue generation, identifying business models in the arts, and helping artists figure out what is the best way they can generate revenue. And this could be independent artists, museums, not for profits, for profits. So that's what we really do in the arts, because that's the gap that I felt was most evident when we came back. When I came back after doing a master's in arts management from Columbia College Chicago, I just felt that there were a lot of curators and there were a lot of organizers, but there were not enough people helping artists figuring out how to run a good arts business. And that's kind of what led me to starting this company. And touch wood, it's going well. And the pandemic is also didn't really throw a spanner in the works, but I think made us think about everything differently. And so that's what today's conversation is going to be about, is from what I understand here.
Thank you, Shreya. So, yes, I wanted to ask you, can you give us a little bit of background on how were things developing before the pandemic? What were some main topics and problems maybe that artists were facing before that?
So I think pre-pandemic, and this is like before March 2020, it's only 1.5 years ago, but it feels like it's a different lifetime, because I was thinking today, what were we doing before the pandemic? It's like that. But funding was the biggest problem, and we had a lot of structural issues. And again, arts, I want to again clarify, is such a broad term in India, because we have performing arts, we have stand up, we have folk arts, we have indigenous arts, we have contemporary arts, we have traditional arts, we have crafts. So it's very, very broad. So all my answers are very general across the platform, not specifically towards any one form of arts. But yeah, funding was the biggest problem in India specifically, because we don't have too much public sector funding. And even if the funding that we have is very, very less. So we do rely a lot on the community to sort of support a specific art, and sponsors, not donors too much, because we don't really have a strong fundraising model like the US or Europe has. But yeah, we have donors who do help, but not in a structured way. But yeah, so the funding was the biggest problem, and the lack of a structure was another biggest problem that I saw, and I felt like that's what we're trying to do, is trying, because it's very informal. Everything is informal. The whole economy is informal, right? So how do you sort of take something that has a very rich, strong history like the arts in India, which has been informal, and how do you sort of make it into a formal structure, or at least try and put a loose structure around it, right, to support it? Because at some point in time, if we don't build that structure, we are going to face longer problems, in the future. And as it is, the arts was a vulnerable sector, and the pandemic has only shown us and proved to us how much more vulnerable it is.
So you were talking about the need of building this structure. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how did this change a little bit for this time? And during the pandemic, did you find some ways to manage this lack of structure in a better way?
So I can't say that there have been huge developments with creating the structure, but what we did is that at least we created some systems in place for helping artists find relief in terms of monetary relief and things like that during the pandemic. Because artists, you know how it is, right? Arts are always the first to go and last to come, and in any sector, right? They always pull the plug on the arts always first. So I think what we did was a lot of people sprung into action in terms of collecting funds and donations and supporting them. But I think what didn't really happen is consistent support didn't happen. And but that is not really something towards the arts. It's also nobody knew what was happening with the pandemic, right? They were like, okay, great. So we know the arts needs help. So here's the first 3-4 months. We have some funds set across for the artists. People who are donating, people who are raising funds, people who are doing workshops and giving the money and the proceeds to the artists. But then post 6 months, they just expected things to open up, and it didn't. So that second and third round of support didn't really happen, from what I understood, and from what my lens is. And so that, I think, as arts managers, is what really made me think was that I had to also take a choice, right? I don't have unlimited amount of funds to give to the artists, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of artists. So I said, instead of spreading myself thin and saying, let me collect, let's say $10,000 and give it to, let's say, I don't know, 3,000 artists. Let me take that 3,000 artists and try and support them until the economy reopens. Right? So that is a strategy. So at least, okay, I can't help 75,000 artists, but I can help these 3,000 artists. And that's like the way I put a structure into it. And I said, okay, these 3,000 artists, I will be their support system, right? Would that be deaths? Would that be them getting COVID? Would that be, them having some other issues, whatever? I'll be that support system for these X number of artists. And I think that's kind of what we slowly developed throughout the pandemic, right? As we saw things open, close, even if everything else opened up, they were still not allowing chances for performances to open up, right? And it started opening up only in March and April, when things were actually beginning to open up. And then again, like, we had a very, very bad second wave in India. I don't know if you know, like, thousands of deaths, and things were just incredibly bad. And that shifted the mood very, very fiercely. So, I'm coming back to the question of the structure. So that's what I, for example, did. But in terms of when you're in a pandemic and you're firefighting so many different things, I don't think people were thinking about structure. But this is where, Milena, I think we're at that cusp, right? Where if we now, when things open up, if we just go back to doing everything how we were, like, I think we've learned nothing from this entire thing. The key is now, right? When the things are opening up and artists need to go back into a performance structure if they're performing artists, or a sales structure if you're a contemporary artist. This is where we need to set the structure in these next coming months, because this is where I feel like people are mentally ready. They've had a bad experience for 1.5 years, and now this will hopefully they're more receptive to accepting a structure. Earlier there was also this thing of, like, I don't want to change, I don't want things to change, I don't want a power structure, I don't want, there were all of these sort of things. Whereas now I feel people are ready, to accept a structure.
So I wanted to ask you, this is very interesting for me, how you decided to support these artists. And for me, it's interesting to see, how do you see this developing once things open up? Like the system you've set for yourself, how do you see it developing for the future?
Yeah, so what we basically, there are 2-3 things that we figured. So we're doing this thing called Funds for Folk. Let me just tell you, for one of the fundraisers we did. So like I said, we were doing it more informally. I was doing it more informally all of last year, 2020, and earlier 2021. But this year, I said, when the second wave hit, it was a very different mind space we were all in. And I said, okay, we have to do something a bit more collaborative. So I have collaborated with an independent artist and a music producer, and a Ghana singer. Ghana is a certain type of indigenous music from northern Chennai. So the three of us, so I'm an arts management consultant, a music producer, and this singer and artist. And this sort of collaboration has never really happened before, where we've sort of joined hands to support artists and build artists. And there were 2-3 different ways we thought about that. One is that we wanted to have people from the community be part of the core team as well, because it's not just like us, people with privilege and access, etc., giving away like donations and funds. That has a different connotation, where somebody from the community actually doing the distribution and fundraising. So the community sees that situation very differently. That was one thing, because we wanted them to feel empowered within, rather than feel like somebody else has to come and help us. That was one thing. The second thing, which is really the relief in terms of money or food or groceries or whatever that we've been doing, is only going to go that far, right? And when we spoke and did an audit before we started this Funds for Folk campaign, people said, we need the rice and the groceries to survive, but we really want work, like we want to perform, like that is the ultimate relief for us, because we are performers. In 1.5 years we've just been sitting at home while people give us food, whether it be the government or some people in the private sector, which is great and we're very thankful, but we want to perform and earn that money, or we want to just perform because that's who we are. And most of these people don't really have a very strong sense of identity in terms of paperwork and stuff like that. So they are very much a part of the informal economy, and they've not really been able to adjust into a digital economy either, where they're able to do online performances, etc. So it's just, we said, okay, so that is really the relief, right? That is truly is giving them that chance to perform, giving them back their performances is really what people need. And so one thing that we want to do, which is in our long-term plan, once we finish the first 2-3 rounds of donations, is that of relief and the survival packages that we're giving them, is that we really want to start doing small performances for them in these various different areas, because that's sort of where they will also get relief, and we will also feel happy that they are actually back to performing, and also try and see here if we can introduce them to new spaces, to new audiences, to to opportunities that they have not had in the past, because whatever they've had in the past will come back to them. That's not the worry. It's about how do you sort of expand them and expand their reach and chances of performance here. So that's like the third sector of our plan, but we obviously can't plan that till things come up and things stabilize a little bit. So we don't want to, because it's always this, right? We go 2 steps forward, then 2 steps back, and 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. Then 6 months later, we're in the same place where we left. We've not really gone anywhere. So we said, okay, let's not plan anything right now. Let's just let things open up, and then when we have the situation and the scenario and it's safe for everybody, we also don't want to just ask these artists to go ahead and start performing if they haven't had the vaccine and things like that. And a lot of people are very apprehensive about getting the vaccine too. So that's another thing that we're trying to sort of, slowly get them to come on the other end and get the vaccine, because then we feel a little bit more confident in asking them to take the risk to go and perform outside.
Yes, this makes sense. Here in Bulgaria as well, there is a big, I don't know how to even say it. There is big doubt in the vaccine, and it's really hard to make, especially older people. It's really hard to convince them that this is actually beneficial and they should use it. But yeah, I want, now that you're talking about the performances, it's interesting for me, and I hope for everybody else. What are some main topics of exploration that were important for artists before and now, in terms of for example, some artists there is a huge movement in eco-related topics, at least here right now. So if you can say something about the main waves and topics in India.
So there's a lot that's been happening. And I think, again, in the first wave and the second wave, there's been a very distinct difference of how people presented the art. The first wave, perhaps because though there were cases, there were not this many deaths and things like that. People were sort of more into promotion mode, into marketing mode, right? So they were doing these lives, every other day there was something, they were just they just sort of went into social media marketing mode, and it was social media was flooded with stuff. And there I saw 2-3 different things happening, right? One is artists suddenly discovered social media, I feel. They were like, oh wow, I can do all of this. But I don't think many of them were strategic. They were just like, let's flood it. Let's flood everything with every idea I get, with every collaboration I get, with everything that I ever want to do online, let me do it. It was like that. It was not very strategic, is what I felt, because there's too much going on. They were not They were not gauging, saying, how can I be smart about what I put? They were just, everybody was trying to do something different at the same time, you know? And at the end of it, nothing is different, everything looks the same. So that sort of happened in the first run. So that was bizarre, and just everybody was trying to like make the most of it. In the second round, which is in the last few months, artists I think have really taken a step back. And here I'm going to speak specifically about performing artists um, who were a part of the digital economy in the first round. They have definitely taken a step back in understanding or critically thinking about how arts is relevant in our lives today and why it is relevant and how they can make it relevant. Because if you take something like a classical performance, a Bharatanatyam performance, for example, what we do is like compositions that are like 200-300 years old. You know, there's stories about gods. You know, so it's like, okay, what does that do to me today, right? Let's say a story of Krishna and Radha from like maybe a 200-year-old composition. It's great, it's beautiful. I'm not saying it isn't, but um, how does that affect, or how does that fit in everything else that's happening in the arts world today, right? In terms of relevance, in terms of being able to engage with that sort of material today. So I think people like finally have started thinking about how do we bring stories like that to contemporary times and adapt it to times of critical thinking from the lens of LGBTQ rights, from the lens of sexual harassment, from the lens of feminism, from the lens of Brahmin patriarchy, right? So, from the lens of even a caste system, right? From the lens of so many different things of privilege and access. So, I think now, because of the situation of so much loss, financial, economical, emotional, people have really started to rethink the way they practice their arts and present their arts, right? And I think that critical thinking took year and a half to develop. So in terms of trends, the trend right now I feel is that people are actually sitting and thinking. They are actually sitting and observing and analyzing and trying to figure out what is best for them and who they are in it too, which is a very difficult question to answer. It's not something that's individualistic, or it's not even something that as a community we can decide. It's something that they have to sort of analyze and understand for themselves and see where their stance is in terms of LGBTQ rights or sexual harassment or the Me Too movement or whatever. They have to sit now and critically think about it, right? Because as people become more vocal about all of these things, if we don't acknowledge that and continue to just do our arts, I don't think that's a healthy way to evolve anything. And we have
That's
to way to, sorry, I was just going to make one last point about the audiences as well, right? Is like, if we are going to go into a digital audience, which is what I think happened in the first thing, where it was a global audience, then you also mean the global audiences are going to challenge what you're doing today, right? Not saying that people in Chennai don't challenge. I'm just saying that when you put yourself out on a global platform, you're going to have to answer all of those questions. And so now is a question of, yeah, everything I put on Instagram, anybody from Timbuktu to my neighbor can ask me a question about it. And I'm going to have to answer that. And for that, I need to have a very strong personal conviction of how my art fits into today's reality, you know. So I know it's a very broad answer, but that's, I feel, where things are going. Is really that critical thinking is become more of a necessity than it was before.
And this, what you mentioned just a little bit earlier about the privilege and how we have to contextualize it and consider ourselves within it, is something very, I think it's related a lot to the digital environment as well, because we've noticed, at least when we did our research in Bulgaria on digital audiences, we asked people about their internet access. And how did we ask them about their internet access? Online. So, only people who actually have internet access can tell us whether their internet is good or bad. But at the same time, you see how all these social issues are coming up of kids who live in smaller villages or towns who don't have internet access and can't access school, for example. So, is there such paradigm in India? Is there how is and how does it relate to the cultural sector? And is there a way to address it?
There are two, three different things here. One is that, yes, of course, access to internet is one thing. Access to tech, right? Cameras, gear, to record what you're trying to do is the second thing. But we have in India is a peculiar country where I feel like everybody has a cell phone. Again, I'm being very general, but most artists have a cell phone, and most artists have a camera phone. And we have a few suppliers who have kept internet plans so cheap that today, like, you won't have a TV in your house, but you'll have a cell phone, and you basically consume everything on your cell phone. And they have some like ridiculously cheap plans for like 1 GB a day, and like you pay nothing. So because of that, I feel like, again, I'm only talking with the artists that I have been working with and I have been exposed to. I feel like that connection is there, but that does not mean one, that all artists have that, but also it doesn't mean that they are able to adapt their craft or their art into a digital um, economy. They're not able to monetize digitally from it. And even if they say, yeah, okay, I'm just going to go on Instagram Live, I'm going to put my camera there and just do my performance, it doesn't translate in terms of the quality of it, because they don't really have a studio, they don't have a good mixing. And it's not just in, like, social media lives are only going to be of this quality. You can be using the best equipment, but it's only going to be of a certain quality. So just coming back to the fact that some things are not translatable online. And this is where I feel like a theater, a dance theater performance is so much more easier to just go straight into an AR platform or a VR platform, because that's where I will consume it in the way it's supposed to be. Because when I have it just from like one camera and if I'm doing a whole dance theater piece, it doesn't work. Like for the audience, it doesn't work. Even if I record the program with a 3-camera setup, it still doesn't work. In terms, yeah, we document it, it's fine, but the experience doesn't translate, right? Same thing, music is okay, but dance is very hard to sort of grapple. Which is why I feel like you should just skip that whole 2D and go straight to AR and VR. Then I feel like the essence of the art is able to translate. Because at the end of the day, if the artist is not able to give you a good quality performance digitally, you're not going to support them. Like, you're not going to want to pay for it. You're not going to want to follow them. So I feel for artists, but the sad part is the artists who need that kind of tech are the artists who can't afford it. And artists who just don't have the means to afford it. So I don't know, we're thinking about a few different avenues and a few different grants that we're applying for to see if we can take a few of these indigenous artists, disadvantaged artists who need this level of tech in order to survive, and do it for 1 or 2 programs and see how it works. And if it works well and if it's an adaptable model that we can scale, that's an excellent way for them to survive into the future and take one step ahead of everyone else. That's what we need to do, right? They can't be 2 steps behind. They need to be 2 steps ahead. That's the only way disadvantaged artists, I feel, are really going to get.
Yes, this relates a lot to one project we are working on now, and they're leading. Actually, later today we have training. It's related to digital technologies in storytelling, but one of the partners is working specifically with AR and VR, and they had developed a project of with AR, I think it was this time, with dancers in the street. So as you're exploring the city, you see people who are dancing on the street, and this is exactly a much more immersive experience, even if it's still 2D, and it's a little bit more accessible for the audience, because the flip side of this is, can the audience afford to watch this performance in VR? And how are we going to make this happen? Like, is this going to be something that is you go to a space and there's the VR sets and that's the only space you can access it if you don't own your own? And how do you make this more scalable and accessible, because the two things are related?
Yeah, definitely. You have to empower the audience and you have to empower the artists at the same time. But I think it's like a chicken and egg situation, right? Somebody has to do something and then it'll follow. Like 5 years ago, if somebody told me you'll be having Instagram lives, a clubhouse, and Facebook live and Zoom calls, I would just be like, no way, like no way would you have done this. But it works in a weird way. So you gotta do it somewhere, and then like I also feel if the audience really likes the experience, they do it. Like YouTube now, if you go to YouTube, you have a VR option. So all, or at least most of the videos that are shot with the VR, you can watch with VR, which I thought was such a smart thing because YouTube is so accessible, right? I don't have to ask everybody to come onto a new platform. If I can shoot a VR video and put it on YouTube and just tell them, hey, this is the 100 rupees, or it's like a $1 thing that you need to buy. Great, just go buy it and keep it, and you can watch everything on YouTube. Then I feel like, okay, that's a solution that we have, right? Because it's already a platform that is already has high engagement. I don't know. It's all trial and error. What I've learned with the pandemic is just, sometimes just throw a lot of spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks.
I agree totally with you, because that's how things have been going for so long. As like, I want to know, as parting question from me, and maybe Gary after that we'll have something to ask you. What do you see happening now, apart from the sitting and thinking, that seems that is going to stick like the spaghetti on the wall for artists and for art managers as well?
Yes, I think if anything, people have understood a few different things. One is that they have to continuously evolve and innovate, and they can't just sort of repeat, stay comfortable too long. Um, that was one thing. I think people have also figured out that they need to diversify their revenue streams. And because most, you know how it is in the arts, right? If one thing works, just keep doing it again and again and again. We can't do that. We have to have diverse streams, and we have to normalize having diverse revenue streams. So if that means you need to have a part-time job that's not in the arts, go ahead, let's do it, right? If that's going to give you some sort of financial independence that arts is not giving it to you, let's do it, because that's the only way you're going to be a better artist, in terms of having some sort of financial security. Otherwise, you're struggling as an artist, you're struggling creatively, you're in a pandemic, things just don't work out. So that's one thing I advocate also. And if you can diversify your portfolio even within the art sector, that's great too. So from licensing, from choreography, from YouTube ads to teaching to grant writing. If you're able to do that, that's fine. But otherwise, there are the other options as well. And I think people have also, I have definitely decided that collaborations are the way forward. Like, I don't think we can do this alone. We need to come together as a community truly to collaborate, not the way of just saying, oh, I want to collaborate because they have more followers, or they have more influence, or they have more clout. It's not just that. At the truth of it, there has to be a collaborative mindset, and a mindset to really develop that form or that craft or whatever it is. Unless you're thinking at a sector level of development, if you're just thinking of your personal development, it's not going to work, because unless everybody moves forward, you don't move forward. Otherwise, even if you move forward, you're alone somewhere, and it becomes a very isolated life after a point. So it is, and within the sector, there's so many things. There's grants, there's audience development, there's strategic management, there's putting the structure, there's planning. There's so many things that have to be done. And again, I think that's the way, is like truly collaborating for the better of everybody. That is really the way we're going to be able to survive, including individual artists within the system. So, and I think that people have discovered, and they've also done so many collaborations this whole pandemic, that people also understand what is a good collaboration and what's not a good collaboration, and who has a collaborative mindset. And every collaboration is very challenging, right? But it's very easy to sit. It's not very easy, but it's a certain comfort for you to sit in your room and sit in your studio and create work. It's difficult when you have to create work with someone else who is maybe your competitor, maybe your senior, maybe your junior. It doesn't matter. But that is where the true learning is. If you're not able to fill those gaps, I mean, at the end of the day, how much can you just do on yourself, by yourself? You need that. So I think these are things that are going to be happening moving forward. And I see arts managers playing a very pivotal role in guiding the sector and guiding artists, because it's not really the artist's responsibility to be thinking about the sector. It's the arts manager's responsibility. But I think now, hopefully, people have understood what arts managers do, and they're willing to give us certain level of trust and opportunity and space for us to help craft this structure and be a part of the ecosystem to survive. Because I mean, this is what we're trained at, right? We're trained to build art structures and develop arts sectors. So hopefully, I think with this whole experience, in order for us to be less vulnerable, we all have to come together.
I totally agree with you. This was something that kind of stuck out in Bulgaria as well. I think it was probably the first or one of the very rare times when actually individual artists and arts organizations started collaborating in order to achieve something larger than them, in order to change policies, in order to change funding structures. So I think hopefully you're right, and this will keep being the way forward.
It makes good that America, Bulgaria, India, no matter how big or small the artist sector is, monetarily or economically, we still have the same problems at the end of the day.
True, true. Thank you very much, Shreya. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us. And it was really a pleasure. And it was a pleasure to see your face as well. So hopefully we'll be able to keep in touch soon again.
Yeah, we will keep in touch to everybody else's episodes as well. And hopefully this was helpful and I didn't give too many general answers and was able to give you only some context of what the hell is happening in India, though we're a very wide, broad sector. So, but yes, thank you so much for having me and hope you guys have a great day.
Thank you, Shreya. Bye-bye.